up next to talk about good times in closed systems, we have Mr. Vernon Spain from the Universal College of Learning. So please welcome Vernon.
G'day everybody. I've jumped across the ditch from New Zealand to come and sort of talk about my first experience on a full SAAS system, so hosted externally to the organisation I was in. So where did it all start? Once upon a time, in fact most of my jobs, I've been the full Moodle administrator. I've been able to add plugins and do all the customisations that I ever wanted. And so very quickly it became plugins for everyone. People would come to me with a problem and there'd be a plugin for that. It's like the App Store, there's always going to be a solution. We had plugins for look and feel. In my last job especially, it was a whole lot of different colleges that have been brought together and amalgamated. So the law people wanted their own law-themed courses, the fitness people wanted their own fitness-themed courses and that kind of stuff. And so with the plugins, and there's many of them, and I'll mention a couple soon, we were able to give very specific customization to each of the courses to differentiate the programs quite clearly from each other. So we had plugins for function and for form. If anyone was at Moodle Moot in 2016, you would have seen I did a talk on Generico, and it's still one of my favourite plugins out there. Generico is a templating plugin, and we used it highly extensively. And what we could do with Generico is make up some very specific customisations for anything in Moodle, specifically for course pages. And a teacher would come in, I don't know if you can see the buttons up there, and they might click on, what have we got there? A semester nav, so our courses run in a semester model. It would fully rearrange the CSS and HTML and occasionally JavaScript and make that course look and behave in a very special and specific manner. Other favourite ones was an auditing plugin. We had a lot of consistency, we had some very strict requirements for all of our courses, and so with an auditing plugin we were able to set up a full workflow. The EdTech team would come in and set up the course. We'd click a button and then it would automatically notify whoever the teacher had been automatically enrolled to that course. They would come in and go through whatever steps that we set up and arranged for them. And when they finished, they would click the button again and we or someone else in that chain would get a notification. And so with these plugins, we were able to go through and have very consistent, very managed courses with a high level of oversight. There's even a report with the auditing plugin where we could see all of our courses and download them on a spreadsheet and see which are up to date and which have been fully audited and that kind of stuff. So it was good. I was happy. Everyone was happy. Things were really, really consistent. They worked well. Bang, 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 here's a plugin. But then I changed jobs. I jumped across the ditch. I was based in Brisbane, so I went over to Palmerston North and went to work for UCOL, and you can see the branding there. And it was a SAAS system. I couldn't just add plugins. I mean, I was initially a little bit lost. I was like, you know, it's pretty bummed out. How do I change stuff? How do I do stuff? My current job uses a SAAS Moodle hosted by a company, another provider. If you're at Moodle Moot last year, you'd understand that. A non-Moodle partner. And only plugins from a set list were allowed. So we had quite a restricted list of plugins. And of course, most of my favourites weren't on that list. Anything not on that list attracted a development fee and an ongoing maintenance fee. I can see some people nodding. And the cost of this was incredible. Like one of the plugins I requested was actually more than it would cost for quite a decent hosting package. And then half of that every year to maintain that plugin. Not a happy camper. I had to sort of almost go back to basics, go back to the basics of Moodle, look through all the tool sets and that kind of stuff, because it was no longer easy to do these things that the plugins in the past had done for us. So how do I make things look cool? It was just a lot of hard work initially. I went through all the staples, template courses. We'd set up a template course, we'd set up a nursing template course, we'd set up architecture, all that kind of stuff. And you know, we'd use a grid format and standard pictures, and you know, that was okay. I mean, that's a staple of the Moodle environment. If you're not doing templating, you're probably going to get a lot more variability. So I started thinking, how can I start affecting the changes I wanted? Well, you've got the Moodle editor, but it cleans out all the CSS and JavaScript added to it. So, you know, that kind of limits what you can do. this is actually a good thing. It's a great thing. It's a security feature. So, I mean, you don't really want to change that. But it cleans out all the CSS and JavaScript to add to it. So, I mean, you know, you're almost back to square one. So, the next option is the additional CSS. Now, most themes these days have some kind of additional CSS. In Boost, it's the raw initial SCSS and the raw SCSS. And in the past, I've only used this to tweak the theme. So the changes that you made, that I made by the additional CSS, were just across the entire LMS. They might be how the buttons behave, or you know, how the pages and sizing of activities and things like that. So it was pretty rudimentary. Then I had a bit of an idea. I sort of started thinking, might have come up in a conversation somewhere, that it's not just for existing CSS, but you can create new CSS classes as well, stuff that's not included in core Moodle. And by creating those new classes, it then gives you an ability to start doing changes. And it allows the administrator to make code templates that teachers can use to add visual improvements or customizations to particular areas. It might be a course page, it might be an activity level. So I started having a bit of a play with some of those. So this is a two-part solution. So you've got the CSS, which is lower. So that's applied at the site level by additional CSS. And then you've got your HTML. And so with that HTML, you're then calling your new CSS classes, which do new and interesting behaviors depending upon what you've set up. So this is an example. You're just seeing a lot of code up there at the moment. But there's the HTML, which you place in the course, and the CSS, which you apply at the site level. And so that means without needing to change the CSS, somebody can paste that HTML into your Moodle editor, and it's not cleaned out because there's no CSS or JavaScript included, and then you can start getting your effects working on that page. So, giggity. This is a bit of a show-off example I did. I had a YouTube clip continuously scrolling in the background, Earth from the International Space Station. It looks very pretty. Obviously not very educational, but you know, it's good for showing off. But the caution for this option 2 is the site-wide CSS is exactly that. It's site-wide. So any changes you make, you've got to be prepared for those changes to appear everywhere. So that's a lot of, you need to really understand what you're doing there. You can't just kind of throw in some new CSS because it might mess stuff up. If you interfere with existing CSS, it has to be unique and it has to be planned, otherwise you could break your site. You could break your page, you could lock yourself out of your page. And of course, that's bad. Now, the limitations to that we found, I wanted individual CSS for particular pages, like a unique course page. And the moment people heard that I could customize the look and feel, logos was the first thing they asked for. Our nurses wanted, we've got enrolled nurses and registered nurses, and they've got a beautiful little sort of medallion for each of them that they wanted on their pages to make their pages look distinctly nursey. And so, where they wanted it was very special. And if I added the CSS I used site-wide, it would affect all the other courses. We pushed over the course title in Boost so that it's at before the title. But by adding that CSS, it would have affected the entire site and pushed all the labels across. So how do we just make it happen on an individual course page or an activity? Which brings us to option 3, trusted content. This is an important permission that should be tightly controlled. And the reality of it is, if you're using a SAAS Moodle, especially at a larger institution, you won't, for the most part, unless you're a full Moodle administrator, be allowed anywhere near it. From Moodle.org, you get Moodle will always thoroughly clean text that comes from users to remove any possible bad scripts or media that could be a security risk. This trusted content system is a way of, with certain people, giving them permission to bypass that on a page, and you can do this on a page-by-page basis, but you need to be very careful. However, with it, I was able to get my logos. So with the trusted content, I was able to create a local, on a page level, a logo field that didn't go across the site, that didn't affect all the other logos. But now, as you can see, we've got our pretty Bachelor of Nurse logo. I put it into the template, and because it's already there, every time we back up and restore that course, we roll it out for a new one, the logo sits there. If somebody edits it, however, if you're an ordinary teacher and you edit it, it self-destructs because they don't have the ability, the trusted content ability. So then they have to go, I deleted it. Can you add it back? Other requests we got and other examples I used it for. When I first went to Moodle, to UCOL, we inherited a lot of lecturers who were quite disenfranchised with Moodle and technology in general. And so as part of a peace offering, I would do things for these people that I wouldn't normally do to the level of clients. And one of these was one of our MIT lecturers. She wanted her students doing a test in a lab to have the picture side by side with the text entry field. And there's a few different ways to do it, but the trusted content was one of them I did. I added particular code just on that page so that her students could see that little pretty picture of the bones or the structure of what it was and do their little essay questions next to it. So, I can't find that setting. Well, odds are it's controlled by the Moodle administrator. If you're not a Moodle administrator, it certainly pays to have a good relationship with, to try and develop one with your Moodle administrator. If you speak to your Moodle administrator, odds are they're not going to give you that permission. If they're smart, they're not going to. You shouldn't really hand that kind of permission out unless you've thoroughly trained and oriented that person and you fully trust that they've got the experience and wisdom to do that. Or you're on a very small site and don't worry about that kind of stuff. So hopefully they will, or somebody that they've authorised, will then sit down and create what you need in terms of these templates of code that will allow you to do your own thing. And so, like our nursing logo, somebody who can back up and restore a course can back up and restore a course, they just can't edit that code. So that's a bit of a safety issue. I tell people to practice this elsewhere because get your own dev or practice site. If you just got to your Moodle admin and say, oh, I want to do this, they probably won't be too impressed. If you go up to your Moodle admin and say, this is what I've done on my own dev site, how do we go about doing this on our institution site? How do we go about doing it? I've got 2 or 3 sites. I have dev sites up on some of the cheap hosting sites, like Hosting, some of the German outfits or GoDaddy or people like that. And you can whip up a new site just like that. So you can play to your heart's content with these settings. You can experiment with that kind of stuff very cheaply. And if you make a mistake and destroy the site, well, you haven't really lost anything and you don't have people hunting for you. You can do some of this stuff on Moodle Cloud. I had a bit of a play, quickly put up some logos and stuff like that. But Moodle Cloud's free, but there's a lot of other options out there you can do to play with it. So quickly, thanks and credits. My line manager, who's wonderful, and my co-worker, who's also wonderful. I've got on here the plugins that I mentioned, the Generico filter and the workflow block, which is that auditing plugin that I mentioned. Happy to give the slides afterwards. Any questions? Crickets?
It's less of a question, but can I just say thank you so much for sharing, because sometimes presentations are a bit like, I'll tell you what I did, but I won't show you how I did it, and I really, really appreciate you showing us how you did it, so thank you so much.
Most welcome.
That where there's a will, there's a workaround approach is a really good canny one. I was wondering, have you explored using, because Moodle now has Bootstrap, both CSS and JS baked in, you can do kind of some pretty natty stuff with layout, design, even interactivity, without having to put any custom CSS or JS in, because it's just there. Have you had a play with any of that stuff yet?
Oh yeah, we have had a lot of templates, but I also used to direct people off to layout it.
Yeah.
And so layout it, one word, is a page builder where you can go up and drag and drop your elements in and build sort of page layouts. It's kind of good for storyboarding in that effect. And then teachers and people like that can copy that code and paste it into their editors and sort of get a really good idea of what those Bootstrap frameworks and things look like. The only problem I have with layout it is that if you put in your header stuff, it starts messing with your own headers. So, but yeah, no, it's definitely a great idea. Okay, thank you very much for your time.